Israel had been carried into captivity. Judah had been carried into captivity. And they wanted to maintain their worship even in captivity. Under the law of Moses, they were only allowed to offer sacrifice at the temple. But they weren't at the temple. They were in foreign countries. They were captives. And so they wanted to do something to maintain and teach their kids. So one of the things, in fact, the biggest thing, in fact, the only thing that I included, is they started what's called synagogues. You'll see these frequently in the New Testament. Jesus would sometimes go into the synagogue and speak. The Apostle Paul frequently went into the synagogue and preached. So the synagogue was started primarily so that, you're saved, you want to keep your faith going, you want to be encouraged, but you can't travel back to the temple because that's way too far. So you would invite some other friends that were Christians, and you would meet together, read the Bible, study the Bible, fellowship with each other, encourage each other. And so soon synagogues had spread all over the foreign countries. Then as they came back to Judah and Israel, they scattered all over that country. It was a great way for people to meet together in their community and read the word that they had, pray, eat, fellowship, and maintain their unique beliefs and their their doctrine and so forth. They did not offer sacrifice because that was only allowed back at the temple in Jerusalem. But they did get together to just read the Bible. They would read it for hours. They would pray for hours. Then they would say, I just want you to know I'm praying for you. They would encourage each other. So when we get to the New Testament, we find all of these synagogues. Where do they come from? They're not in the Old Testament. Well, they came about during that 400 years. By the way, the 400 years are often called, I thought I put it in here somewhere, the 400 silent years. During those 400 years, God did not speak to his people. God did not send any prophets to his people. They were 400 years in which God was basically silent. But the biggest thing that came out were the synagogues. And when we get to the actual life of Christ, you will see that. Now, in the New Testament, we run across some people that were not in the Old Testament. These groups came up during the 400 years between Malachi and Matthew. The first group are the scribes. We are very blessed, more than most people know, and our church is very blessed, but we as a people are very blessed. You can go to many bookstores and buy a Bible and take it home and have your own Bible to read. A lot of places can't do that. A lot of countries can't do that. They could not do that in the Old Testament, nor could they do it between the Old and New Testaments. If we wanted to, because it'd be so big you wouldn't be able to carry it, but we could actually print an entire Bible if we wanted to go that route. But back then, they didn't have printing presses. They didn't have copiers. If you wanted a copy of the Bible, you would have to find a scribe, and that scribe, this was his full-time job. It's how he made his living. He would take a manuscript of the Bible and sit down, and I mean with great pains, copy word for word, letter for letter. They would copy letter for letter the entire Bible, and then you could buy it from them and you would have a Bible. If we did it on our printer, I've never run parchment, so we would probably go, even if we went with 20 pound, you know what I'm talking about, it would still be so thick that you would be hard to carry it. But if they wanted a copy of the Bible, the only place to get it was from a scribe. And because they wrote the Bible every day, portions, every day they would write Genesis, tomorrow Exodus, they would write it. It would take a long time. And so they became known not only as writers, but they became known as scholars. You read the Bible that much, hopefully you pick up something. And so they were considered scholars. They were not in the Old Testament. But when you start Matthew, lo and behold, who in the world are these scribes? Where did they come from? The next group are Pharisees. If somebody walks up and says, "You're acting like a Pharisee," is that a compliment or an insult? Do what? Yeah, they're insulting you because of that's one very big reason. They grew because in a foreign country with foreigners, foreign religions, many people, and we'll get to them in a minute, but a lot of people would just kind of blend in with the foreign, religious people. The Pharisees determined that they were going to keep the old ways. We will not compromise with the new ways, the heathen ways. We are going to adhere to the old ways that we were taught. Well, as time went on, they decided to make up a few laws of their own. And they made up a few more laws. And if you broke any of their laws, some of them were punishable by death. They became so strict that they literally made salvation by works rather than grace. And I have known people, grew up with some people. If your hair touched your ears, you're not saved. That will exclude you from church because your hair is too long. Ladies, if you were allowed a wedding ring, but if you had more than a wedding ring, you were considered gaudy, flashy. And so they would exclude you. In trying to keep the old ways, they actually became, how did I want to phrase this? They began making up rules themselves to protect the old rules that were not rules really. If you had false teeth, you could not wear false teeth on Sunday because that was carrying an excess load and that would carrying that extra load in your mouth would be work, and so you were not allowed to wear false teeth. Isn't that ridiculous? Yeah. I could give a lot of other examples of modern day Pharisees, but they started to protect the law of Moses. It's just that they began to take too much upon themselves. And anytime anybody, and it can be me or anybody else, that begins to say, well, it's not in the Bible, but I say, watch them. They're dangerous. The motto when I was growing up, if it's not in the Bible, it's not Baptist. If it's in the Bible, it's Baptist. Well, unfortunately, that's not the way it is today. They started with a great intention, but they ended up destroying the very thing they were. The third group, which is the exact opposite of the Pharisees, are the Sadducees. Both of these groups rose up during those 400 silent years. You don't find Sadducees in the Old Testament, and yet when we get to Christ, lo and behold, there are Sadducees everywhere. Where did they come from? They came during the 400 years from Malachi through Matthew. They were the liberals of the day. You want to wear long hair? Fine. That's between you and God. They also were willing to compromise what they believed in order to obtain favor from the rulers. How would you like to be my vice president? If you're going to be my vice president, you got to get rid of those stupid ideas you've got about, going to church all the time. Oh, well, yes, I can forget that, in order to be vice president. And so they would compromise to obtain money or to obtain position and power. The third group, I hope you already know, are the publicans. They were Jews who found out that they could get very, very rich working for the Roman government as tax collectors. Except they cheated just a little bit. Rome would send me how much tax you owe. You don't know how much taxes you owe. You don't know. But I get this letter and it says, you owe $50 in taxes. So I come to you and say, okay, you owe $100. Well, you don't know any difference. So you pay the $100. I keep the $50 that I added on, plus I get a commission out of the original $50. So whatever they could add on went directly into their pocket. That's why they were the most hated people on earth by the Jews. They were working for the Roman government. They were working and lying about how much taxes, and the Jews had no way of knowing. They were not allowed to see that sheet to know how much they actually owed. And so they sold out for a lucrative job, making money, even if they had to lie, cheat, and steal to get it. They sold out for that. Now, this is the world Jesus was born in. If you were born, trying to think when my grandparents were born, back in the 1900s, My dad was born in 20-something, so his parents would have been born before that. If you were born then, you would have never dreamed of the things that are going on today. You would have never dreamed it. You would have had no electricity. My grandparents on my mom's side were among the last to get electricity in their area. If we went to visit, they had coal oil, lights. That's what they had. There were tractors were in existence, but you had to be really, 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 really rich to buy a tractor. I've told people this, and younger generation just thinks I'm crazy. I can remember my grandparents. If you wanted to make a phone call, you went over, it was mounted on the wall. You took the earpiece off, put it up to your ear, and you had a ringer, long, short, 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 long. That was Mr. Norris down the street. Short, 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 long. That was the Nelsons down the street. You didn't know 555-1212. You knew rings. I told some young people that, and they couldn't imagine a rotary dial, let alone anything else. Obviously, kids growing up today are very different than my grandparents growing up in their day. I can remember my dad finally got enough money to buy a car. It'd take us an hour and a half to drive to my grandparents' house because the car would only go 20, 30 miles an hour. Now I can make that same trip in about 15 or 20 minutes, and it would take Dad an hour and a half. And I can do that same trip in about 20 minutes. So Jesus was born in a world that was not the world he had created. It was not the world that he gave Moses for the children of Israel to live under. Jesus was born in a world that was already full of compromises. And so as we look at that, hopefully that will explain some of the opposition that he got. Why did they want to kill him so much? Because under Moses, they would never have done that. But he was born in a different world than Moses. And so the things we're going to see, the things that are going to happen are because of, in large part, the world that he was born in. I remember when we had running water when I was real young. You know what I mean? You ran down to the creek, got the water, and ran back. Outdoor plumbing, I told some kids, young people, outdoor plumbing, and it's like, you're kidding. No, I'm dead serious. So, and this is not in my notes, the Bible has not changed, and the Bible never will change. But if we try talking to the younger generation, the way that we could talk to my grandparents, they're going to look at you like you've got a horn sticking out of your head. We need to understand the world we live in is not my grandparents' world. And to try to do just like my grandparents did, you're not going to get rid. The Word of God has not changed. But what has changed is how people listen and how they, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Respond. My grandparents, my wife and I were talking the other day, Even when my granddad Spears was lost, even when he was lost, he still knew a lot of the Bible. When they had revival, he would still have the evangelist over for a meal. You know, it was just, he still had enough respect for the things of God that he still reverenced the Sunday. You did not work on Sunday. You went to church. They had a circuit riding preacher, so he was only there like once a month. But when he was there, you were there, even when he was lost. That's not the way it is today. Not even close. All right.